it's easy for an employee to expect the company to deliver the next step. And certainly the company has a responsibility to play. But I like this concept of like, we're on a road trip and you as the employee, you're in the driver's seat and I'm your co-pilot. Like I'm right there with you. I have a map. I have a few options like, hey, maybe we go here or here. You can take this route or that route. But like you're driving, I'm not driving. And it should always be that dynamic. I think that just puts the right mindset around career development.
Hi, I'm Ted Blosser, CEO and co-founder of WorkRamp, where we're redefining the corporate learning space with the world's first all-in-one learning cloud for employee and customer learning. Welcome to the Learn Podcast, where we learn from the biggest leaders in SaaS and hear what makes them successful. Hope you enjoy the show. Hey everyone, we're so excited to have on our guest, Marta Pinilla, the Chief People Officer at Airtable, on with us today. Welcome to the show, Marta.
Thank you, Ted. It's great to reconnect.
For some background, Marta and I actually go way back. We actually met at Box back in 2011. I believe you were in recruiting coordination at that time. So today we're going to do a really fun journey mapping. We're actually going to go through Marta's career journey. She's had some really interesting experiences at Box, and then she migrated over to Airtable. And so one of the best careers I've seen from recruiting into now the CPO role at Airtable. Before we jump into that, Marta, can you tell us a little about your current role? Tell us a little more about Airtable. I think most people know it, but just in case they don't, tell us about the role and Airtable as a company.
Absolutely. So starting with Airtable, our product empowers any team, regardless of their technical skill, to design applications that power critical workflows and that make their valuable data useful to them and the day-to-day. And of course, this shows up in a myriad of different ways, depending on the company, depending on the team. But one fun example is Equinox, the global gym club. Pretty much all of the digital content that members interact with on the mobile app is powered by Airtable. And they've built their entire production pipeline on Airtable. And they're able to publish content about 400% faster than they were before. So it's just one example, right? But overall, we have about 450,000 organizations that use Airtable, including 80% of the Fortune 100. And that's product. And so far as the organization goes, we're a little bit under 1,000 employees. We just celebrated our 10th birthday, I guess you could say, in February. Wow. Yeah. And we're a hybrid environment. So we do have remote folks and have offices in the Bay Area, Austin, London, LA, and New York.
So you're saying Airtable can keep you more fit if you work
I think so.
Work out at Equinox. So it can do everything, which is great.
It can do it all.
I need maybe introduce Equinox into my workout. Airtable into my workout routine. It will keep me more fit. Totally. Let's start off with your career at Box. When we met at 2011, you started as a recruiter, individual contributor recruiter. Tell us about those years. What did you learn? How were they? Yeah. Tell us about those early years.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you remember those years at Box. It was a period of hyper growth. I joined when the company was around 200 people. When I left 7 years later, it was about 2,000. So lots of stories from that period. But in those early years, it was particularly high growth. We went from 200 to 700 in a couple of years. And I was one of two people on a team that did all recruiting for essentially non-sales roles and non-engineering roles. So that's everything else, design, product, post-sales, G&A. And it was bonkers. We had 50 roles open at any time per recruiter, 14 phone screens a day, talking to candidates. And I think on a surface level, it taught me a lot about the value of hard work and time management and, kind of seeing the fruits of your labor. But I think on a deeper level, the takeaway that I had that continues to serve me to this day is in a startup environment or really any high growth environment, there's going to be 20 things on fire or more, probably more. and you will not get to all of them, right? It was not perfect. Things fell through the cracks, but it taught me how to figure out what the top 3 to 5 fires were and like what really moved the needle. And that kind of like deep editorialization and ruthless prioritization just became part of my DNA thanks to that experience. Now, would I want to do that again? Probably not. It was a time and a place for that kind of craziness, but it was really valuable and I learned a lot.
That's awesome. When you think back to those early years, was there skill you developed? Like, was it the sales skills? Was it the time management skill? What was like the number one skill you felt like you developed in the early days?
Yeah. I would highlight a couple. I think one around prioritization. Again,
Okay.
this kind of daily, weekly, monthly reflection on like at the end of the day, what do I need to say I've accomplished? What is truly moving the needle for the business and how do I know that? And knowing from the get-go how I'm going to measure success. So I think that is probably number one, and again, continues to serve me to this day. I think the second was around business partnership, which is somewhat inherent in the role of recruiting or, other internal facing roles where your customer is, the leader, right, that you're working with. But I think it's valuable in any role, right? Especially because I was working such a diverse set of hiring managers or leaders. What a controller cares about is really different than what a head of customer success cares about. And so learning how to ask the right questions, really understanding what it was they cared about, what kept them up at night, being curious about that, I think lended itself well for my role today, even, right, in terms of building strong relationships with stakeholders.
Well, you did the individual contributor role for a little over 3 years, and you learned, like, I bet you, how many candidates did you close in those?
Oh gosh,
3.5 years. Would you say?
Probably like
50, 100?
No, like 150 or
150. That's
150,
crazy. Think of all those careers you affected. That's so awesome.
Well, yeah.
But you basically go from IC into leadership.
Yeah.
And you start moving up the leadership ranks over those years. Like the remainder part of, I think it's about 4 years left at Box when you got promoted. And so how was that? How would you say that jump was for you? Like, did you get a mentor? Was it tough? And then walk us through any big learnings. Jumping into basically your first, I think is your first leadership role in your career. So walk us through that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I had the gift of a mentor and manager that I think gave me all the fundamentals. And I think with managing humans, it is first and foremost an apprenticeship in that, yes, you can read all the books. And while that is important, having individuals that can be good sounding boards along the way and that you can run practical examples by and, have that thought partnership is really valuable. So I think for me, I had somebody at work that was that person for me. And that was huge. But I think, the jump was tough. And it was tough because I moved from full cycle recruiting, which is where you're, talking to candidates, giving offers, et cetera, to managing a recruiting coordination team, which coordination is a role in which folks schedule interviews. So it's a process oriented position. It's less client facing. And not only that, the way that it was structured at Box, this was a team that was sort of a stepping stone into full cycle recruiting. You started as a coordinator and then you moved on. And so a lot of the folks that we hired had their sights on becoming full cycle recruiters as quickly as possible. They were bright, ambitious, and they were doing roles that at times were tedious and repetitive. And so it really forced me to focus on strong management fundamentals because I didn't have the headwind of an interesting role. I should say of a role that they were interested in the long run, right?
Yep.
They were doing. And so it forced a lot of coaching, a lot of career development conversations, setting expectations effectively around time and role. And that was hard, but useful. I would say though, I then moved on from that to managing increasingly large full cycle teams there. And I think a few of my takeaways in terms of, guiding principles, I guess I would say, are one, it might seem obvious, but I think at the end of the day, everyone wants to feel seen at work and understood. And again, it seems like management 101, but I think it's so often missed, and especially in a hyper-growth environment where it's go, go, go. Simply asking questions, being curious, not only for the person to feel seen, but also for you to know what's going on in their world and to be able to translate that upward is so important.
Let me double click into the time you were managing coordinators. And I think it's really relevant for this market, especially heads of people, is that there's this perception that, hey, because the market's not growing as fast as it used to, that there's basically career stagnation. Do you, and I could see that even back in the heyday where it's like, can't probably recruit someone after 2 months of coordination. I don't know what the cycle was. I'm guessing probably over 9 to 12 months or something back then. But like, how do you battle through that perception with employees? Do you have any tips and tricks, even fast forwarding to today's role or back then, that you learned?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's, it's like a multi-layered cake, I guess, in that I think there's a systems and expectation setting layer, and then there's the kind of the day-to-day coaching and connecting the dots to opportunities layer. And I think both are important. On the first one around kind of the system side, I think creating rich career frameworks is so valuable. And I know it can oftentimes be dismissed as like HR speak. And there are certainly some career rubrics that are lots of fluff words and not that useful. But, having a leadership team spend time really thinking about like, what's the scope of impact and expected outcomes in this role? And what are the competencies that we want to see developed that go beyond checking a box? That was one of the challenges we ran into at the beginning of the box days, is we had our initial rubrics were like very much like very binary. Have you done this or have you not done this? And that's not the point of a career, right? Most skills, most competencies are a spectrum, and communication as a competency. I'm still working on my communication just as I was 10 years ago. What I'm working on is different, but that richness should be captured and the frameworks that are applied. And those frameworks should be socialized early, when somebody joins throughout their tenure, and there should be career plans around that. So I think from a systemic standpoint like that is important to do. I think from a like one-on-one coaching and career development standpoint, there's so much power in the person knowing that you care and you asking about their career development goals. I think often managers are scared to have the conversation because they don't know and they don't have an answer and they don't know when the promotion opportunity is going to be. And I think what's missed in that is that oftentimes, like, not talking about it makes the person think that there's something wrong. They can assume the worst. It's a black box. If they know you care and you're asking them regularly and you're having conversations, even if there's ambiguity, as long as you make that implicit ambiguity explicit, right, then you're on the journey together. And then the last thing I would add, I have a very silly, cheesy analogy I use all the time around career development that I think is the right visual, which is, I think at times it's easy for an employee to expect the company to deliver the next step.
Yep.
And certainly the company has a responsibility to play. But I like this concept of like, we're on a road trip and you as the employee, you're in the driver's seat and I'm your co-pilot. Like, I'm right there with you. I have a map. I have a few options like, hey, maybe we go here or here. You can take this route or that route. But like, you're driving, I'm not driving. And it should always be that dynamic. And, I think that just puts the right mindset around career development.
That's a great analogy. We might use that internally as that, hey, you're right. You are in the driver's seat of your career. We might be in the passenger seat or back seat giving you tips on where to go, right? But at the end of the day, like, hey, we're not going to be your employer forever, but during this portion of the road trip, we're going to make sure you have the right opportunities to grow. So that's awesome that you had that experience learning it at Box first. Hey everyone, want to take a quick second and talk about the WorkRamp Learning Cloud. We're on right now with Marta from Airtable. She's a chief people officer there. Airtable is a customer of WorkRamp. They use WorkRamp's Learning Cloud to enable their employees, empower them to upskill, and also educate their partners as well. So if you want to learn more about how Airtable's being successful with WorkRamp, check us out at workramp.com and get in touch, and we're happy to share more. Now back to the show. Okay, let's transition from Box. So you do this really good run. I feel like you're one of the few people in the Valley that has these nice long runs at companies, and this Airtable run is going to be a great one too. But you do 7.5 years, I believe, at Box. Then you transition. You were like icon of Box, but then you transition over to Airtable. Tell us about the why of that transition first, and then how that transition went. Because again, that's not easy to leave a place where you probably knew. Again, you said you recruited over 150 people personally, and probably indirectly, over 1,000, I bet, or something like that. But how was that transition over to Airtable?
Yeah. And look, I mean, clearly I'm biased because I have spent a long time at some places, but I think, that's one of the beauties of joining a high growth company is, if you were to ask me like, well, I often get the question like, so long, why? It's like, I felt like I had a different job every 12 months, even if my title was the same and the scope was the same. The challenges I had were different. And I think this goes back to what you were asking about earlier around like, how do we think about career progression and an environment that is changing? And I think it still comes back to like finding the richness and evolving challenges. But with Box, I knew it's funny. I knew it was time when I felt sort of this inner peace of, okay, I've done something I'm really proud of. And I feel like I'm graduating. I didn't feel like I was leaving a job. It felt like this kind of a like educational journey I had been on. I had a successor in mind. A lot of this like kind of core systems and process that we had been really pushing to build for kind of scalable recruiting in the long run were built. And it felt peaceful. I didn't feel like I was running away. I just felt really proud and ready to move on. I took 7 months off. And I traveled. I went to Europe for 2 months. I did a 6-week road trip with my now husband. We didn't kill each other, so that tells me something. And I met Airtable through through a Box connection. I
Awesome.
wasn't looking, and I ended up doing consulting for Airtable, and this is how they get you. Because I was asked to develop the recruiting plan for the next 12 months. And once I did, I was like, well, I want to do this. So can I do this? And the rest is history.
That's awesome. Okay. I want to break down Airtable maybe into 2 parts.
Yeah.
I love to get best practices from a recruiting perspective. And you were doing a lot of it during the hyperscale time as well too. And so love to hear about that. And then the other part will shift into kind of the people aspect of things, what you've learned so far too. That's a little bit of the newer role for you.
Yep.
But give us your top learnings. Let's start with recruiting. Give us your top learnings on the recruiting side, because now you were basically running the show versus kind of coming up through the ranks at Box. But what did you learn, instill, anything additional you'd like to share about that initial time or the recruiting time at Airtable?
Yeah, totally. I kind of don't remember the first 7 months. It was so crazy. But that aside, I learned so much and it was a really powerful time. Just to set the stage, the company was around 80 people when I joined. There was one recruiting coordinator and no internal recruiting team. So it was definitely like a build the plane while you're flying the plane with no mechanics on the plane situation. And
just handing out offer letters.
It's so follow the things. But no, I mean, also with a really thoughtful hiring bar, which is, why I joined. But we had the charter of going from about 80 to 200 and some within 12 months. To give you a sense, we ended up going from about 80 to around 900 in 3 years. So
Wow.
it was quite the journey. And I think what stands out in terms of what helped us be successful, one was taking a dose of our own recruiting medicine, hiring very well on the recruiting front. And what I mean by that is, there's a lot of incredible recruiters out there, but specifically I was looking for recruiting talent that had done hypergrowth before and understood how it, the ambiguity, the shifting priorities, and the agility required to get through the period we were going through. Right. And
do you recommend in those, because we will have a market again eventually, right? Do you recommend overstaffing in those hypergrowth years, or were you still understaffed most of the time? Like when you came in and just you're probably like, what's going on?
totally.
Yeah, one coordinator. How's this even working? What do you recommend in those hypergrowth times from a staffing perspective? Assuming you get great talent.
Totally. There's no silver bullet answer. What I would say is we looked at a combination of full-time resourcing and flex resourcing. Where we did apply flex resourcing, we use RPO. So it's a recruiting process outsourcing is what that stands for. It was essentially folks who would embed themselves in our team, and, essentially act as recruiters or sourcers. And we would have them for, months at a time. And doing so helped us maintain our bar around candidate experience, hiring manager experience, while having flexibility of, hey, in 12 months, we decide we're going to, take a step back. Now we didn't, right? But, I think, being super mindful around flex versus full-time, and every 3 to 6 months, I kind of check okay, is this the right balance? Is it not? And I tended to be a little bit more conservative where needed. I do think at the end of the day in hypergrowth, as a recruiting leader, you're there to help hire, and you're, I think, probably better to be a little over than under, right? In terms of the ultimate goal.
Okay.
Hiring.
So great people. Anything else besides great recruiters? And a lot of people don't even give that answer as the first thing they say. Oh, it's all about culture or just have a high bar. But I love how you started with actually, hey, the entryway has to be has to have some of the best talent, and then that can spur more talent from there, or they can recognize talent, right? Anything else major on the recruiting side?
Yeah. So I think we made some early investments in having a robust tech stack on the people side, especially on the recruiting side, and the right operational team to make it happen. So as an example of this, we use Greenhouse for our applicant tracking system. We spent a lot of time making sure it was correctly configured, which, again, seems basic, but I think, I know at Box anyway, we didn't spend enough time doing some of that early on, and that just later on creates those scaling challenges. So I think investing in that before you think you need it, you need to start doing it 6 months before you think you need to start doing it, at least. So I think that really helped. And then from a people team standpoint, and you hinted at this with, when we were talking about recruiters sort of being the gateway, I think at the end of the day, the people function is an extension of the CEOs and the leadership team's point of view on talent, and staying super close in terms of what are the top priorities, what's keeping them up at night. So I think for me, building that strong relationship with our CEO and our leadership team was critical.
Okay, let's shift gears for the last 5 minutes or so in your new role as CPO. And again, congrats on the new role. Tell us about how that's going, any key learnings or things you're starting to implement that you're excited about.
Yeah. It is such a privilege. I'm enjoying the role tremendously. I think for a number of reasons. One, I'm getting to still work with the people leadership team that I work with. A lot of them have been at Airtable for 2 to 4 years, right there with me. So that continuity is amazing. The multidisciplinary nature of our world is also so engaging. You go from designing compensation strategy 1 minute to learning about an employee relations issue that has yet to be seen, and next, trying to close a candidate. So that is fascinating. The weight of the importance of this function in this era is not lost on me, right? I wouldn't say that we're in unprecedented times because we've seen highs and lows in economic cycles before, but that combined with the emergence of hybrid work, 3 years of, I guess, post-pandemic. I don't know if we should call it post-pandemic yet, right? But this new way of working combined with an economic lull after so many years of a bull run, it's a lot for human beings to process and handle. And so I think the weight of thinking about employee well-being, company success, and all of this, I take that very seriously. In terms of something I'm really excited about, I know you might be hearing this from everyone right now, but AI and how AI can enable HR professionals. So on our end, we're currently betaing Airtable AI, and I'm seeing the team just organically take it up. So as an example, one of our team members used Airtable AI to basically create the first draft of a career framework. It took 20 minutes. It's mind blowing. It would have taken him probably 6 to 8 weeks to write all the content and ensure it was consistent vocabulary across each level. It took 20 minutes for a first draft.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Sounds like a blog post coming soon here.
It totally. And so seeing that, and we're doing an AI use case challenge on the people team.
That's cool.
And I think that's important to me, right? I think there's so much we don't know about what the future holds with AI. But what I do know is everybody on the team needs to be empowered and understand how to leverage AI to be as effective as possible. So I'm excited to see them take up that mantle.
And is there a cultural rhythm, or let's call something you do on the people side that you think is pretty unique that our audience can maybe learn from that Airtable does? I'd love to see if there's any interesting tidbits there.
Yeah. A couple that I might highlight. One, starting during the pandemic, we did institute quarterly recharge days, which I know that is not that unique. A lot of companies did something that helped, employees unplug. What we did alongside that, though, is, because recharge days made a shorter week, we found initially that people were trying to fit 5 days of work into 4, which then ends up not being useful, right? So we made those weeks focus weeks, which mean we mostly remove standing meetings that help move the needle forward, fine, keep them. But the idea is it's all about focus that week, right? To avoid that 5 days in 4 thing. So that is one thing that's been well received and really useful. Another thing that, is maybe applicable in a hybrid world, we don't have any strict mandates around attendance in office. But what that means is that it can be easy for critical mass to not hit any given day when folks are coming in, and that has been challenging. So on the people team, we've instituted monthly in-person days, and we plan them out 4 to 6 months ahead of time so folks know and they can come in then. And
that's org-wide. You suggest org-wide, hey, if you're coming in, come on these days.
For the people function.
Oh, people function.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. At a local level.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and each function sort of has their own norms and expectations.
Okay.
Yeah.
I love that. I've heard recharge days before, but I haven't heard, you're right. Actually doesn't really serve its purpose when people are working harder the next 4 days. But I love the concept of the focus week coupled with recharge. I bet you those are really productive weeks for you all. So, all right, Marta, we're in the home stretch here. I'm going to go into what we call the learn rapid fire round. This is always really fun. What I'm going to do is just ask you a couple questions here. Give me a 1 or 2 line answer for each, just so we can see what's going on from a learning perspective with you. So the first thing first question I'll ask you is, who have you learned the most from in life?
I think I'm going to have to say my husband, who from Box Days.
I learned a lot from him too. I might even quote him.
Having worked together, we just turn to each other for a lot of thought partnership and learn a lot from him.
Well, I will attest, he's a very thoughtful person. So great answer. Okay, next one. What is one, let's say, podcast, book, blog you've learned the most from, or that you're just super passionate about right now?
I love listening to Fresh Air on NPR because I think the way Terry Gross asks questions is a thing of beauty. And if I could do just one more, I would say Business Breakdowns. It's a podcast and they cover all sorts of different types of business, and it just helps me get out of the tech bubble that I'm in.
I can't believe you like that. That's a Colossus group, right? I think.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that podcast. I think you and I are maybe their biggest listeners, probably. Awesome.
Probably. Yeah.
It is very interesting though. Great podcasts. All right. Last one here. What is one topic you want to learn more about in the future? Imagine you're taking that 7-month trip again between Box and Airtable. You can learn about anything you wanted to learn about. What would that be?
It's a little bit of a cheat because I'm already deep in this learning hole, but I've been really into glucose monitoring and glucose hacks recently. So it's wearing a continuous glucose monitor. One tip, if you're interested, is if you have 1 tablespoon of vinegar before a meal, it will reduce your glucose spike by about 30%.
You do that before every meal?
I do it once a day. Before every meal, it's a little too much vinegar, So before like my starchiest meal, I'll have a tablespoon.
Wait, so you just literally drink a tablespoon and just start eating, or you take a little pause? Because I'm going to try this.
Good question. Yeah. Ideally 10 minutes before, but as long as it's within about an hour and a half of the meal, you're good. Also, you can mix it up with stuff. So you could do actually like a cinnamon apple cider vinegar tea. It's really delicious. If you're interested, Glucose Goddess on Instagram. She is a biochemist that is where I've learned a lot of this from, and she has a ton of fun recipes. I recommend checking her out.
All right, listeners, we're all going to do our vinegar tonight with our dinners. So, Marta, thanks so much for jumping on with us. This is a great session. I'm sure the audience will learn a ton from you. And thanks for being a guest today.
Thank you.